Hi, everyone. Welcome to the February 7th edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragona. I'll be joined in just a second by my co-host, Craig Milkowski. This week on the podcast, we're going to take a look at the stakes racing at Tampa Bay Downs on Saturday. Headlining that card is one of the Derby preps this weekend, the only official Derby prep, the one offering qualifying points towards the race, that being the Grade 3 Sam F. Davis. We'll talk about that along with a couple of other stakes on that Tampa Bay Downs card. We'll stick with the 3-year-olds and move to Aqueduct to talk about their Jimmy Winkfield going 7 furlongs. And then we'll stay at that distance at Santa Anita and talk about a stakes race on Sunday, the San Vicente for the 3-year-olds, where we have an intriguing matchup of a recent maiden winner who a lot of people are pretty excited about, and last year's 2-year-old champion Storm the Court. So, Craig, how are you doing? We got a little taste of the 3-year-old action last week, and we'll get a few more of the very highly regarded names in action this week.
Yeah, we sure do. With Independence Hall showing up at Tampa, I think it's should be an interesting race, as we're going to talk about here in a minute. It's not the hugest weekend, but the Sunday, the San Vicente, surprised me with 2 of the bigger names we've heard recently popping up in the same race, let alone one that doesn't offer Derby points. So I'm glad we're going to talk about that one. And just looking forward to this. I actually went to the Davis at Tampa a couple years ago. I haven't had a chance to go back, but I had a really great time there and hope to get back one of these days soon, because it's a really nice area.
One of the tracks I've never been to. Hopefully I can make it there one of these days. And that's where we're going to start. We'll eventually get our way to the Sam F. Davis, but we'll begin with a couple of the undercard stakes races. Beginning with the Suncoast, which is race 9, whereas the Sam F. Davis is for the 3-year-old Colts and Geldings. This is for the 3-year-old fillies, going 1 mile and 40 yards on the dirt. And I thought this was a pretty competitive race. I think you could make a case for a lot of these horses. You've got a bunch of sprinters stretching out for the first time, so that could create a little bit of pace up front. Although the pace projector is not predicting a fast pace, I would imagine they're going to go an honest clip, and maybe that sets it up for a horse like Motu, who figures to be among the choices in this race, but there are a lot of ways to go.
Yeah, there are. It looks like a pretty evenly matched field to me. It's a big 9-horse field. As you pointed out, the pace projector doesn't think the pace is going to be fast. It just kind of it's kind of average, and I can see that. It wouldn't surprise me with lately raced horses if it winds up being quicker than expected, because, we don't really know at this point. With these horses haven't defined what they're going to be for the rest of the time. So the opinions I had in here, the first one is the morning line favorite is Comical, and that's a filly I really don't like at all. I think she's probably pegged at what she is on the morning line because of her performance against Bass before the Breeders' Cup. And that was a race where the pace was just an absolute crawl. I think she had a dream trip that day, couldn't hold off Bass, but it was all about the pace. And I think she's a horse who is probably going to turn out to be a better sprinter than a router. Of the others, Motu certainly looks okay. I do think she might need a little more pace than she's going to get, but again, you don't know how much we're going to see, but it's probably the second choice in here. I'm not all that thrilled with her either. The horse I found myself leaning towards is Blame Debbie. She's coming out of Demoiselle at Aqueduct, and I thought she ran a sneaky good race that day. It's a race where the figure came back good. I think she actually has the best TimeformUS last race speed figure, and it was over a track that at least I think was somewhat speed favoring that day, and you wanted to be more towards the inside, where she wasn't. So if the race goes off anything like the morning lines indicate it might, I would be on her for sure.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with Blame Debbie. I think she's one of the major contenders in this race. I also liked her Demoiselle effort, and I thought she was facing some stiff competition that day. She seemed to really relish the 1 1/8 distance, so we'll see if this slight turn back works against her at all. But she's got one of those versatile running styles where she figures to work out a good trip. I have very similar feelings about Comical. She wasn't really for me in this race. I agree with your assessment of her Chandelier performance 2 back. And Motu just seems like pretty moto, master of the obvious horse. She's going to get a decent pace set up. She's coming off a good effort in the Goldenrod, but that was a sloppy track that some horses didn't seem to handle that well. And I don't want to give her too much credit for that race because her prior efforts, while they're okay, they're not quite up to that level. I mean, I would also consider a horse like Turtle Tracks coming out of that Goldenrod because she's one that really didn't seem to handle the track that day. It was her first time stretching out in distance, and some people might say, well, maybe she's just a sprinter. She doesn't look like a sprinter to me. me. She's this long striding daughter of Cairo Prince who seems like she wants to go longer. Maybe just the goldenrod wasn't the right day for her. So I wouldn't be shocked to see her do better. The other horse that interests me in this race is We the Cloud. So I liked a little bit in the Gasparilla last time. She's one of the horses who's stretching out in distance for the first time here. And I'm intrigued by her pedigree because she really is bred to stretch out. Her dam was more of a router. Her dam is actually a half sister to a horse named Tappa Tappa Tappa, who won the Suncoast. So there is route pedigree on the dam side, and she's a daughter of Constitution. They seem to be able to get at least a mile just fine. And I like the way that she stayed on at the end of that Gasparilla. I don't love the race overall, but she was just pretty determined down inside in a race that was kind of falling apart late with more of an outside flow to it in the stretch. So I'd hope that she could improve a little bit on the stretch out because she'll have to, but she'll be a price.
Yeah, I look. Motu actually does have a little higher Timeform speed, US speed figure than Blame Debbie, so she does come in with a slightly higher 104 to 102. The two horses you mentioned, I have nothing against them. They will definitely have to improve a little bit, but as we've seen on many of the races we've talked about already early in this year, that can and does often happen with 3-year-olds, and you do tend to get paid when you pick one of those right.
This sequence of races doesn't get a whole lot easier as we move on to the Tampa Bay Stakes, Grade 3 event for the older horses going a mile and a 16th on the turf at Tampa Bay Downs. And I would imagine that the favorite in this race will be Caribou Club. He's listed as the favorite on the morning line. He is just pretty consistent, always seems to run speed figures that'll put him in a mix in a race like this. He's really just a rock solid grade 3 type of performer. My issue with Caribou Club is the distance, because I know he's won going this far in the past. To me, though, a mile really is just sort of his max, and he's always a little bit dicey going anything past a mile. So I think that makes this race a little more wide open.
Yeah, I think it is wide open. I agree with the TimeformUS pace projector. This is a race that I talked about on Out of the Gate this week. We have it pegged as a fast pace, and I don't see any reason to think it wouldn't be. There's plenty of speed signed on in here. There's some real need to lead speed, like Real Story, who's drawn out in the 8 post. We have some other horses who have run pretty quick. So for me, it comes down to the closers in here. And I'm kind of with you on Caribou Club. He's fine. He's not a horse I want as the favorite. He could certainly win. And I even thought similar about March to the Arch. He's a horse. He has nice speed figures. He overcame a slowish pace at Gulfstream last time. Although, to be honest, it wasn't against the best field. He's certainly facing a better field in here. So I don't really have any knocks on those two. I was just looking for a little more value. And that kind of pointed me in the direction of Devamani and also Hembry. Just going to have to see the tote board and see which one is offering more value. But Devamani's first time in the barn of Chad Brown. He's obviously stepping up in class. He hasn't run it against this kind of competition before, but he does have the speed figures to compete. Whereas Hembry is the horse. He's coming in for the red hot Mike Maker. He just seems to win a lot of these races on turf. He's been winning a lot of turf stakes or in Florida lately. And Hembry's a horse who I think projects just to get a really nice trip. He's not a horse who has to drop a million lengths behind. I mean, he has shown tactical speed in the past. And I just like his post, think he's going to get a better trip and maybe offer some more value than the other logical alternatives.
Yeah, I considered all three of those horses that you just mentioned, in addition to Caribou Club. Hembry, for me, I kind of had the same problem as I do with Caribou Club, where I'm just not sure that he's a true turf router. He's done well in a lot of those one-turn mile races. He ran okay going 2 turns at Saratoga, but I thought he got really favorable setups in those races. So I'm a little wishy-washy on him. Maybe he gets another good setup here, but I just wasn't sure this was the right fit for him. And Devamani, I don't know what to do with. He's a horse that I've never really been a fan of. And I know he's got that speed figure 2 back that I would suppose puts him in the mix here, but he got an absolutely perfect trip that day. He was really lucky to win that race in a spot where Instilled Regard had a much tougher trip and probably should have won. And there was another Chad Brown horse in there, Flavius, who also had problems. So I don't really view him as a contender off that performance. And this is not a private purchase. I believe this is just a trainer switch from Rob Atras to Chad Brown. So unless Chad Brown can completely turn this horse around, I'm a little skeptical of him being competitive with these. And I just landed on March to the Arch. I don't love March to the Arch. I just think he's a really good fit for this race. I liked his effort last time in that Sunshine Millions turf, that a horse that he beat, Mugs-O-Matic. I know he's a former claimer, but he's really improved lately. And March to the Arch didn't have a great trip that day. He was wide on the turns, and he just ran that horse down. He's got the back class. He ran a really nice race on the 4-star Dave last summer at Saratoga, ran better than Hembry that day. So I just think he makes a lot of sense in this race, and he's getting class relief from his 2019 races as he did last time. And if he runs as well as last time, I think he's got a big chance here.
Yeah, and like I said, no knocks on him at all. I was just looking for a little more value. He does come in with the best speed figures in the race. His last two are better than I think anybody's run recently, so no problems with that pick at all. He certainly gets a good post. Tyler Gaffalione has shown he can ride some of these stakes winners on the turf. He's not afraid to stay inside and work his way through, so no problems with that pick either here.
Let's head on to that Derby prep that we mentioned at the top, the Sam F. Davis, I think offering 10 qualifying points towards the winner of this race to get into the Kentucky Derby. And the headline attraction, as you mentioned, is Independence Hall. This race really does center around him, and I think there's no disputing that if he gets back to his performance in the Nashua two-back, everybody else is running for second, and they might not see more than a distant blip on the horizon as he just runs away from this field, because he's better than these horses based on that race. The problem is he did really regress last time, the Jerome. I know there are some excuses. He really acted up very badly before the race in the paddock and behind the gate, and that's a real concern. He broke very slowly that day. Do you think those excuses are enough to explain the dip in his speed figure, and are you willing to give him an excuse?
I'm not one that usually watches much pre-race stuff, but I'm certainly going to be watching him because I want to see how he acts. He's a horse. He's clearly, as you said, he's the horse to beat in here. But it's really hard to say how I would play this race because for me, it depends. If he acts up again, I would definitely be against him because I would expect more of that low 100-ish figure that he would run as opposed to that 120 I think he ran the time before. But if he's well behaved, it's probably a race I'd be more likely to pass. It's just one of those. Hopefully they do good coverage of Tampa in the paddock and as they're coming out. I'm sure they will. I use RTN, so I get the track feed. I don't have to worry about getting jumped around or anything like that. So he is the horse to beat, but I am going to be watching beforehand. Premier Star, he comes in. He's undefeated in his 2 starts, stretching out. I think he should be the pace in the race, but he's the horse I'm kind of against in here. Should Independence Hall act up, I wouldn't be moving on to him because I just don't love. He hasn't run all that particularly fast. He's hit the 100 mark, but it's more so the way he's done it. He's run fast early, kind of got tired late. You can see his pace figures as they trend downward the later you get in the race towards the final time figure. So those aren't generally horses that I like stretching out. The horse I would lean to if Independence Hall acts up would be Aja Weed. He comes out of that same card we talked about, the Demoiselle earlier. He comes out of the Remsen. And Shotsky came back. He ran a nice race in the Withers this week. The 110 speed figure he got that day, while once again being another one of those horses not with the trip, is probably the second best in here. So I personally think he's the most logical alternative if you decide to go against Independence Hall.
Yeah, I'm not trying to beat Independence Hall. Like you, I would prefer to see how he acts in the paddock before the race. That might have some bearing on his performance. I'm not going to get too caught up in the drop-off in his speed figure in the Jerome last time. He was just much the best that day. I think of more concern is how slowly he broke because he hadn't broken that alertly in his first 2 starts. It wasn't a total disaster like we saw in the Jerome last time, and he was able to overcome it because that was an uncompetitive field. It's going to be a bigger problem for him if he breaks that slowly heading right into the first turn at Tampa Bay Downs. So I'm a little worried about that. But with Independence Hall, I do think if he gets back to anything close to what he can do here, and I expect him to, he's just going to be too tough for these to beat because I don't love any of the alternatives. I agree with everything you said about Premier Star. I have similar thoughts on Aja Weed. I thought he loved the 9 furlongs of the Remsen last time, and I'm a little skeptical that he's going to be quite as effective cutting back in distance, but we'll see. I also don't see a ton of pace in this race because Independence Hall, I would imagine, is likely to stalk Premier Star and let that one go. Maybe Chopaloo on the outside shows some speed because he's pretty headstrong, but I don't think he's really fast enough to press the pace. So I just don't want horses coming from too far back, so I have trouble going to horses like Aja Weed and Sol Volante as real rivals for the favorite.
Yeah, and I know we talked about Sol Volante. I should mention he comes in with a nice 110 TimeformUS speed figure from that Gulfstream race, the Mucho Macho Man. But to me, I still think he's a horse, and I think you agree, who is probably going to run his best races on turf. He wasn't really making up much ground that day. He ran okay, and I understand I'm taking another shot on dirt. Nobody wants to give up after one race when he actually ran fine, but I just don't see him as a big contender in here.
Yeah, I've got the same feeling as you. I know he improved his speed figure last time, but he feels to me like a horse that they almost tricked into running on dirt that day. He made one of those middle moves with a turn of foot at the quarter pole and just couldn't sustain it, even though the race was kind of falling apart a little bit at the end. So I feel pretty similarly that he's probably not the right horse for this race. Let's stick with the 3-year-olds and move up to Aqueduct to discuss the Jimmy Winkfield on their Saturday card, going 7 furlongs. This race, I think the top 4 or 5 contenders, they look pretty evenly matched. We've got a few coming out of maiden races who are likely to take some money, one coming in from the Mid-Atlantic region. How did you sort these out?
This is an interesting race. As you see, it's not one the pace projector saw a lot of speed, but just looking through the PPs, I have a feeling the pace is probably going to be a little hotter than we expect. I do like Secret Rules a bit in here. I think he will turn out to be the speed of the speed. We have him shown in front. He ran a nice 103 last time, drawing away from not the strongest field in the world. He was 4-5, but he does seem to be progressing. So I don't have any real knocks on him, but I do think he'll cause trouble for the other speed horses in here. So for me, I think he's either going to put the speed away and hang on, or just depending how long he gets pressured, how much he faces early, not just for how fast he has to go and for how long, he's going to have to deal with Montauk traffic late. It's a Linda Rice horse, comes in late, a little low on the speed figures, kind of like Max Player did last week. But again, with these lightly raced horses, I'm not afraid to take a shot that they're going to step up. So for those two, it just kind of comes down to those two. It's going to depend how the race plays out and kind of how they get bet at the windows.
Yeah, I'd agree. This is a race where you do want to watch the board because I had trouble making a line for this race. They're all pretty evenly matched on figures. And I think it's just a matter of which horse you kind of like the most from a visual standpoint watching the recent races. For me, Secret Rules is kind of the horse that I liked the least in this race because I wasn't a fan of any of his races against Maiden Company. I just thought he ran fine in those races and didn't do anything really special. And he was impressive last time from a visual standpoint, but that was just basically a field of claimers. So, I mean, you could see Polar Bear Pete, who was second, is also in this race. He's not much. So I'm just a little bit skeptical that Secret Rules is really as good as that last race indicates. So I wanted to look in another direction. I do respect the 2 recent maiden breakers, Montauk Traffic, who you mentioned, and Quixotic. Of the 2, I prefer Montauk Traffic. He's going to probably get that pace that you mentioned. And I just liked the race that he ran last time. He won going the 7 furlong distance. Obviously, he got nothing out of his debut at Laurel. So Linda Rice wheeled him right back in 14 days. And he was much more professional. He did break slowly again, but not as slowly as he did at Laurel. And he just got right back into the race. You could see that Jose Lezcano had a ton of horse underneath him all the way around the turn. Once a seam opened up in the stretch, this horse just shot on through up the rail, which was arguably not even the place to be at Aqueduct on December 28th. So I just like that performance, even though it came back a little bit slow from a speed figure standpoint. Quixotic is a difficult horse for me to assess because I get his last race wasn't really competitive and it was run in a driving snowstorm and it was a race where nobody really closed. I don't think the track was playing to closers, so the win might look a little bit phony. He didn't face a great field in his debut either, but I do feel like this horse has some more ability than he's shown thus far. I could see him getting bet in this race off of those 2 efforts, and I don't want him at a short price. News to me is fine coming in from Parks and Laurel. His speed figures make him a contender. I just didn't love him either. So I'd make Montauk Traffic my top pick. The other horse that I want to throw in here at a price is the number 4, Old Chestnut, for Mark Cassie. I know this horse has been campaigned only on the turf, and in the pace projector, he's shown pretty far back in 5th. I'm not going to be shocked if this horse refines his early speed because they named Kendrick Carmouche, who's an aggressive rider. He's had some trouble at the starts in his recent races. He obviously was in that mile and 16th race at Aqueduct, which he wanted no part of last time. And I'm intrigued by him getting on the dirt because I don't know why they focused him on the turf so much given his pedigree, because he's by Spitestown as a versatile sire and his dam Pool Land was just a confirmed dirt runner. And there's really more dirt pedigree on the dam side. So I'm not going to be shocked if this horse handles the dirt and shows more speed, and that might make him dangerous here.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention Quixotic. He's a horse. I'm with you. I don't really know what to do with him. His maiden race was pretty good. His figure regressed last time, but part of that's just because of the crazy slow pace that day. He had the field over barrel. So I'm not putting a whole lot of stock in that 87. I'd look more at that 94. And for me, it's just a matter of him being tabbed 2-1 on the morning line. That's not the kind of price I want on a horse that has some question marks. So it's not going to shock me if he wins. He certainly shown plenty of talent, but I think he's the kind of horse you have to go against in a spot like this.
Yeah, I feel the same way. It's one of those races where somebody's likely to step up and run faster than they have before, because you're likely to have to do that to win a stakes race on a circuit like New York, but it's just a matter of who's going to do it, and it's hard to tell based on the PPs. Let's move over to the West Coast to talk about a couple of races from Santa Anita. Before we get to that San Vicente that I mentioned at the beginning of the show, we'll talk about the Thunder Road from their Saturday card, the 7th race, a Grade 3 event going a mile on the turf. And I found this to be one of the most difficult races to handicap of all the ones we're going to talk about, because you can make a case for a lot of these horses. I hardly know where to start. I mean, one of the most intriguing members of this group is probably Frontier Market, who was a private purchase from Chad Brown and Klarvich stable, now with Ronis Racing and John Sadler. His form on the East Coast was okay, and typically when you've got an East Coast horse moving over to the West Coast, they might be a little bit higher class than they were on the East Coast. So I could see him being a contender here, but I feel like he's a horse that could take some money in this spot, and I just don't love him. I would look for more value.
I agree with you. He was the horse I wanted to make a case for, and I just couldn't do it. I mean, you can make a case for him. I don't think there's much doubt. The pace is going to be fairly hot in here. There's plenty of speed. When you have a horse like Kingley drawn outside who always goes to the front, he's going to go fast and try to get over. I'm sure some others will try to keep him away. But with Frontier Market, he's just a horse that I think drops way too far back for the most part, and particularly in California. It's just not as an effective a strategy. The turf courses aren't as big as they are in New York or even at Laurel where he was running, and making that big late run from way back just isn't as effective. So I kind of started looking for some other closers. But before I get to them, I divorced River Boyne a long time ago. I decided I'm never betting him again ever. So you'll never hear me pick him on top again. He just had way too many seconds for me. He hasn't won in pretty sure
it's been a long time.
Yeah, it's been quite a while for him. He's lost at short prices many times. He even shipped the Turf Paradise, a race I missed that he was running in. I wish I had seen it, because I'm sure I would have tried to beat him that day as well. So I'm definitely against him. And I just kind of started looking at some of the others in here. Ronald R. jumped out at me. He has the best TimeformUS late pace rating. He's won with a nice setup before. He gets a good post. The Hunted's another one. It's Richard Baltus. He's hot as usual out there, taking a big step up in class. He didn't run very well against Cowbreds last time, but he did have some trouble at the start, and that's always it looks like a huge class jump, but out in California, it really isn't. These horses all seem to take turns, and I generally take turn, try to find a new shooter, which is why I wanted Frontier Market in the first place. But for me, I just kind of settled on those two, and Majestic Eagle looks good as well. I think he's a horse he's turning back a little bit, but I think he might be suited by the pace. He should get a good inside position, enough to make his run late. So I don't really have any huge, strong opinions in here. I just know I'm not going to take a short price, and, maybe I'll pass. But if there's one of these horses I like that winds up going off at double-digit odds or surprisingly long, then I would take a shot with them.
So I don't have a problem with your take on those three inside runners. I think the trips are really going to be dependent on the chances of Ronald R. and the Hunted. Ronald R. in particular got that insane pace setup too back in the Lure at Santa Anita. We might have talked about that race on the Pacecast, I forget. But they went just as quick as you could possibly go at the early part of that race. He was towards the back of the pack, and the race was just dominated by closers. That was as extreme of a fast-paced situation as you're going to see, and we'll see if it's quite that extreme in this race. I wasn't sure of that, but if you think so, you can make a case for him. I have similar feelings about the Hunted. Maybe he gets the trip. I wasn't sure he was good enough. For me, the most interesting horse, and I know he's the favorite on the morning line, I'm not sure he's actually going to be the favorite, is the number 4 True Valor. I just think this horse makes a lot of sense. And for my money, he was the horse to beat because he ran so well in that City of Hope 3-back. I know that was a blanket finish, but I mean, that came back a pretty fast race and he got a good trip that day, but he really ran to beat that field. And I thought he actually backed up that performance in the Breeders' Cup Mile next time, because if you watch that race, Drayden Van Dyke actually had plenty of horse underneath him coming to the quarter pole. And that was a race where horses were making outside moves and the runners towards the inside that were on the lead were just stopping. And True Valor got totally caught in that traffic jam down inside. I mean, he was never going to be in the money that day, but he would have finished closer. He wasn't going to be 10th. And then for whatever reason, they turned him back to 5.5 furlongs on the turf last time. I don't get what that was about. He's not a 5.5 furlong horse. Now he's back at the perfect distance. He's also a closer, but he doesn't have to come from that far back. And I just thought he made a lot of sense in this race.
Yeah, I could see him getting the trip. It was just the price steered me a little away, and that questionable 5.5 furlong race. Maybe they're just trying to put a little more speed into him to get a little closer up and stay out of trouble. So, like I said, I'll be checking the tote. Good chance I pass this race. Don't really have any strong opinions, but sometimes you can be surprised by the prices. A horse or two or get ignored, and all for value.
Well, let's move on to that Sunday stakes race at Santa Anita, one that I imagine a lot of people will be watching very closely, the Grade 2 San Vicente for the 3-year-olds going 7 furlongs, not offering Kentucky Derby qualifying points because they no longer do that in the sprint races, but a couple of horses who should wind up on the Derby trail eventually, particularly last year's 2-year-old champion Storm the Court, who's making his 3-year-old debut in this race. But the 4-5 favorite on the morning line is the recent debut winner Nadal for Bob Baffert, one whose performance turned a lot of heads. How are you viewing this race? I know Nadal is just considered to be a better horse than Storm the Court based on that one performance. Do you think he can repeat it against a tougher field?
You know, I mean, honestly, the chances I bet this race are probably pretty slim and none. But I wouldn't be surprised if Storm the Court won. I mean, there's nothing wrong with his juvenile. He beat a solid field. He ran well that day. Sure, he jumped up. I mean, if you think it was some kind of fluke or maybe he's just not fully cranked for a race like this, where Nadal has to get going a little quicker because he doesn't have any points. It's only his second start. Maybe he's just more ready to go. You know, maybe he could win, but I'll be watching this one as a fan. As a big tennis guy, I don't like Rafael Nadal. I mean, I like him as a person, but I'm a Novak Djokovic fan, so I'm never going to be a huge fan of this horse. So I'll be rooting for Storm the Court in that direction. But from a betting standpoint, I'll just be watching, and I actually expect them both to run pretty well. I think Storm the Court's getting a little short change for, people are just writing up off the Breeders' Cup like it didn't happen, and I think he ran pretty well that day.
Yeah, I really think this is a 2-horse race. I wouldn't just concede it to Nadal, and we'll see how they bet it. Sometimes the public really goes overboard with these lightly raced promising horses. I mean, if Nadal's 2-5 or 3-5 in this race, that's ridiculous. He does not deserve to be that kind of price. He did run a fast race in his debut. Bob Baffert, just for what it's worth, if you look up the stats in DRFTV, coming back in a second start off a debut win on the dirt, he wins at 28% in a 78-horse sample, but the ROI is just $1.07. So that just speaks to the fact that these horses are routinely overbet to an extreme degree. We'll see how Nadal runs here. There is other speed in this race for him to contend with. Party Town is very fast. We'll see what we get from Ginobili, who was very fast at Del Mar over the summer on the outside. Not saying that the race is going to be that Nadal's going to be compromised by a fast pace here. We'll see. He might be able to rate because he just has that one start. But I think Storm the Court deserves credit for his Breeders' Cup, as you were saying. He earned a respectable speed figure that day. Horses have come back to validate that performance. I mean, we saw the second place finisher Anno Dor come right back and basically repeat that effort in the Los Alamitos Futurity against 1,000 Words. So even though it was a surprising result, him winning at 45-1, it seems like a legitimate result. And he's got to turn back to 7 furlongs, but he won his debut going 5.5. He seems to be training well. So I think this is going to be a horse race. I'd like to see them both run well, and I'm not going to be shocked if Storm the Court steps up and is able to win this race.
Yeah, my one thing with Nadal as well, I don't do the figures for Southern California most of the time. My assistant did, and he did this one, and he flagged it with the F, saying he wasn't totally confident in it. And when I pulled up the chart, only a couple of horses have run back, but both of those haven't run particularly well. One stretched out to a mile, but his figure regressed 11 points. Another ran fifth and dropped a couple points. So I don't even know that 112 TimeformUS speed figure is the most solid that you're ever going to see. So I certainly wouldn't want to be taking a very short price on him.
Yeah, and I will just note, I mean, well, it was not an extremely slow pace by any stretch of the imagination. I think people might look at those raw fractions since the 21 and 44 and not realize that if you look at the TimeformUS pace figure line for that race, he actually has one blue color coded pace figure, indicating that, you typically do see some fast raw times going that 6.5 furlong distance, but it wasn't a fast pace relative to the final time or relative to the other races on that card. Let's talk about one more race just as a little bonus before we wrap up this week's podcast. It's a non-stakes event, but just to give the Sunday cards a little bit of love, we're going to discuss an optional claiming race from Oaklawn Park on Sunday. It's the 8th race, a mile and a 16th. And I just wanted to mention another one of these races because there are a lot of intriguing allowance and maiden races, even at Gulfstream Park, if you look through some of these cards. And this one in particular, there are a lot of horses who were previously on the Derby Trail in this field, newly turned 4-year-olds, horses that have plenty of back class, dropping out of stakes company. There is quality in this race. I think a lot of them have to get back to their best form to have a chance. What did you make of this group? Because there are a lot of ways you could go in this race.
Yeah, there sure are. It's quite a field. This is the kind of race I just love looking through the PPs, especially if you read them from the bottom up, kind of start and see where these horses were and what the plan was and what turned out, how they turned out. I mean, a horse like Lombo, I think he was racing against McKenzie as a 3-year-old, if I remember right. And there's just a whole bunch of stories like that in here. This was a race I was kind of surprised it didn't get the fast-paced designation just because there's 11 horses in here. But when I really dug into the PPs, it's kind of obvious why. There's not a whole lot of speed, which is surprising for a race at Oaklawn. And one of the horses we have labeled as a leader is Lombo. He's probably not in his best form. He hasn't been running particularly well as of late. So I actually kind of sided with the pace projector in here. And we have Lenstar, the 8 horse, pegged to have a nice, clear, easy lead. He's a horse who's stretching out from 7 furlongs. He's coming off a bit of a layoff. But he's a horse who's handled the 2 turns before. He's handled it well at Oaklawn. He's run very well in a couple allowance races there last year. And I just think he has a real tactical edge over this field. So in a deep field where I'll definitely be looking for price because any of them can win, I think I'm probably going to wind up siding with Lenstar at anywhere near those 10-1 odds.
He's going to be a big price. And what you say about the pace situation is not incorrect. There really is no confirmed frontrunner in this race outside of Lenstar. So he should get his preferred kind of trip. We'll see if he gets the mile and a 16th distance. I know that he's done it in the past. I feel like he's a little better going shorter. So this race could get a little bit tiring for him at the very end of the race. But as you said, he's going to be a price. So I don't want to knock a price horse. I mean, of the logical contenders, I guess a horse like Laughing Fox will take some action here coming out of the Travers, but he's one that has absolutely no early speed, so he might be compromised if they're not going too quickly up front. Moving towards the outside, I think Plainsman is very interesting, making his first start off this trainer switch from Shug McGahee to Shug's son, Reeve McGahee, who is just starting his training career down at Oaklawn. And this is a horse that I've always liked a lot. He's shown promise going back to his 3-year-old season when he won the Discovery. He's never really taken that step forward from 3 to 4 to now being a 5-year-old that you would have hoped to see. But maybe going the 2 turns now will wake him up a little bit because they ran him in a series of 1-turn races last year in New York. He actually didn't run that badly in the Kelso when he was 5th. And his last race when he lost to Bone Raison, who was a big price that day, and he was odds on, that was a race that was dominated towards the front end when the leader just got to go a pretty slow pace up front. So I feel like Plainsman has a right to move forward. We'll see what kind of price he is. And I also wouldn't dismiss Night Ops on the outside. You'd want to see him get some position from that outside post because they're going to head right into the first turn. And without a lot of pace, you don't want to see him get hung out wide. But he's really improved in recent starts. He beat that horse Pirates Punch 2 back, who came back with that really impressive win at the Fairgrounds recently. So I think his form stacks up pretty well against this field. He's one of many that could win this.
Yeah, we could probably spend a half hour talking about all the horses in this race. I was just glancing through Shiver Me Timbers as a horse who ran second to Justify in one of his early 3-year-old races. So there's some really cool stuff in here. But, I'm a fan of Oaklawn Park, and they run just so many good deep races like this. And it's even better this year. So many trainers have shipped in from California. It's really up the class. I mean, it's always been deep competitive racing at Oaklawn, but this year is just through the charts. The purses are huge, and the barns are full, I'm sure. And it's not just claimers. There's just a lot of high class, really nice allowance and stakes horse runners. So I'm excited for this meet. We got another 3 months of it, but if you're ever bored and you don't really follow Oaklawn, just pull up the PPs and handicap a few of these races, because they are quite the challenge.
I agree. They aren't all quite as difficult as this one, but they're some pretty nice horses competing down there, and they're pretty competitive races. So I agree with all of that. That's it for this week's podcast. I'm sure we'll be recapping these races in depth on the TimeformUS Pacecast when we get together to talk about these on next Tuesday. Obviously, with Independence Hall being in action and Storm the Court, there'll be a lot to recap, but we'll get to that at that point in time. For now, you can always listen to us on DRF.com, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, and SoundCloud, wherever you get your podcast. Just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel, and you can take in this content, the TimeformUS Forecast and the TimeformUS Pacecast. So thanks for listening this week, guys, and we'll recap these races on Tuesday.